Okay, this lecture is going to be on 1970s. Actually, I'm going to start out with what's known as the second wave, which starts out in 65. So we're kind of still cleaning up the 60s and moving on to the 70s, and then moving on into the 2000s. So when you talk about the second wave, and what they refer to as that is the second wave of feminism, that's really starting about 1965, and I had already touched on that. But didn't necessarily introduce it as kind of like the second wave. The second wave is 1965 to what they say is about 1985. Second wave of feminism, and it was definitely there. They hoped to have the final push for feminism and basically that last push for equality. That was started out basically in the early 1900s, but I think we could actually push it back into like 1880s when you talk about the progressives fighting for it. So let's get into very late 60s, and then we'll move into the 1970s. Federal initiatives. 1967, President Johnson is going to issue what I've already mentioned is the affirmative action, which prohibited gender discrimination. It is also going to prohibit discrimination because of ethnicity, and basically trying to give minority communities access into education and employment. But it also deals with gender discrimination. And women are really going to take that and really ride with it. And actually women will do quite well by using affirmative action. There's also going to start to see a growing number of female judges at national, state, and local levels. And so you're starting to see this, I would say, late 60s and definitely into the 70s. Now, when we move into the 70s, when you talk about 1970, or 1972, you're going to have what's known as Title IX. Title IX was an addition to, well, it's basically added to the Educational Amendments Act, okay, and it's called Title IX in 1972, and it was added to the Educational Amendment Acts. In Title IX, it was Title IX of the Higher Education Act. It banned discrimination on the basis of sex in any educational program or activity that received federal funding. So if you have any type of education, whether it's if it's receiving any type of federal funding, meaning whether it's like any type of like high school or college and it's receiving federal funding, then they cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. And so they basically have to offer opportunities for both men and women. And when you're talking about that, is any type of educational program or activities. So it means that if you wanted to apply for PhD programs, or women could not be discriminated against for applying against with PhD programs or law school or medical school. But it also then, when you talk about activity, it also meant sports. And so you're definitely going to see sports open up for women. I would say in this basically kind of 70s, 72, I would say 72, probably start to see it in 73. And then I think it's going to take a little while for it to build for you to see it. So basically allowed for women's sports teams and sports programs and sports teams. And as we all know, for you to become a professional athlete, you basically have to be doing the sport when you're young, when you're a child, and when you're basically moving up through school. That basically is what creates your foundation in that sport. And then you end up going to college, and then you're on a college team, and then that kind of launches you, could potentially launch you into a professional career. But if you don't have those opportunities as women, then it's really hard to launch into that career. Even with having said that, people just aren't really looking for women's sports, professional teams. That starts to change in the 70s, or I would say like mid 70s, 73 and then up, and when that's definitely going to start to change. But it also just gives girls opportunities and to do things within school, whether it's high school or college. And then when you're talking college, you could potentially be talking about scholarships. And so that's actually going to, in a sense, perhaps open doors for some people that it wouldn't have opened doors for it. They wouldn't have had sport teams for women. So definitely, that's definitely big, and a big piece of legislation for women, for them to definitely use that and use that to their ability. Okay, so we've got that. Now, another thing that we have to talk about is ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. Equal Rights Amendment is going to basically come back, okay? And it's going to come back, and I'm looking for what I want. It's going to basically come back, that momentum to start that the Equal Rights Amendment, as we know, starts in '67 with the NOW organization, and they're really going to push for it. And so it's going to take them a little while to work for it, okay, and kind of build that, not build the momentum, but kind of get things in place and really get women who will be in Congress to support it and really kind of do that groundwork to definitely make that final push. So it's definitely going to happen when you talk about that. It is going to be introduced into Congress, and this is going to come in 1972. In 1972, this is actually the Equal Rights Amendment will be floating around Congress, and it's actually accepted. I mean, they really didn't know how it was going to be received, and now it's actually received pretty well. It's actually doing pretty well in Congress. It's actually going to pass both houses of Congress, so the House of Representatives and then also the Senate, it will also pass. Because it's an amendment to the Constitution, it has to pass both houses of Congress, has to be signed off by the president, which Nixon will sign it off, and then it has to be ratified by the states because it's an amendment, okay? You have to have 2/3 of a majority vote for it to be ratified, or for it to be ratified to become an amendment to the Constitution. So this is all going on, starting to going on in 72, okay? And they will give a time period for it to be voted on by all the various states, and that time period is going to be March of '79. They have to have a 2/3 majority vote by March of '79. And so when it goes to the states, in the very beginning, it's actually doing very well. You'll have 22 states that will be ratifying it, and kind of like right off the bat, but they actually need 35. They'll eventually get very close to 35. They'll actually be three states short of 35 of what they need. But then all of a sudden at the last minute, you'll have a few states, I want to say it's like 4 states, will actually revoke their original decision. So it actually puts them further away from 35. And so when they have a deadline of March of '79, they will not have the 2/3 majority vote for passage of an amendment. And so ERA will fail. They were extremely, extremely close, and it's just various states that couldn't go that far, okay? Now, having said that, okay, I would say there's definitely a reason for it to fail, okay, because it was so close, okay? Now, when the Equal Rights Amendment is introduced, and there's a huge campaign, and they're getting the word out, and women are marching and doing ERA marches and speeches, and so they're really trying to get the word out, okay? But there's also then going to be something else that is occurring because of that, and it's going to be that anti-feminist movement that's definitely there in the United States, or the anti-feminist feeling in the United States, and the anti-feminists are going to basically launch a campaign to deal with the ERA, and the campaign is actually going to be called Stop, S-T-O-P-E-R-A, and it'll be called Stop ERA. And the woman who is at the forefront of Stop ERA is Phyllis Schlafly. And she will do actually a very strong campaign to speak against ERA, and she'll have all these buttons, and she has this big like stop sign that will be kind of what she'll carry around when she does her speeches and when there's marches, and she's going to launch a very strong campaign against ERA. And so when she's giving her talks and her lectures, okay, her speeches, she will argue that ERA offers no new benefits to women. It offers no new rights, no new opportunities that women don't already have now, okay? Now, that's kind of in a very basic nutshell, okay? But then when you also then start to go through her lectures and her speeches, she will say that if ERA passes, it will basically open the door for homosexual marriages, women in combat, taxpayer-funded abortions, unisex bathrooms, elimination of Social Security benefits for widows, and it will hurt families. And so there's kind of like the pretty version of it, and then it's kind of like the hardcore reality of the things that she will say will happen, according to her, if ERA passes, okay? And she'll put up a very strong campaign of Stop ERA, and essentially it works, right? It was enough to just kind of put probably that idea in people that they really kind of had to stop and think. But all the things that she said, I mean, she doesn't really know if they're going to happen if ERA passes, but the things that she mentioned, right? Homosexual marriages, women in combat, taxpayer-funded abortions, unisex bathrooms, elimination of Social Security benefits for widows and hurt families. Some of these have already occurred. I mean, now in our time period in the future, and we don't even have ERA. I will tell you, I don't fully understand the elimination of Social Security benefits for widows. I don't understand that one, once again. And the other ones, I mean, this is just my feeling. I don't really see what is so negative about any of them, except for the whole hurt families, and I don't really think it's going to hurt families. Anyway. The fact is that ERA basically goes up. It was extremely close in the 70s, and it will fail. And it's definitely failing because of that Stop ERA campaign. Okay, another one that we have to talk about, one other one as in pieces of legislation. 1972, you have the Equal Opportunity Act. It will give the EEOC, it's the Equal Opportunity Office, broader jurisdiction and strengthen its ability to enforce rulings. And it will also create the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which will ban credit card discriminations on the basis of applicants, meaning sex, marriage status, or age. Because before that, sometimes it is actually women had a very difficult time getting a credit card. And then if they don't have a line of credit, right, then that can set them up for like not getting loans and stuff like that. Sometimes they would actually have to have like their husband sign so they could get an actual credit card. So with the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, it bans this credit card discrimination. So obviously more women can get credit cards. But then it has a bigger effect when you talk about loans and credit for an individual, for a female individual. Okay, so we got those pieces of legislation. Now, other things going on. When you talk about women in employment, working women definitely will demonstrate that they're going to participate greatly in labor organizations. This is nothing new. They've been doing it since like the 1870s, 1880s. But you definitely see them definitely playing a very large role in labor unions at this point in time. Good example will be Dolores Huerta. She will be pushing for a labor union for the farm workers, and they will achieve that. Farm workers will achieve a union, and that will be the National Farm Workers Association. Huerta will be vice president of the union. That will be in 75 when they achieve the National Farm Workers Association. So that is fabulous. That's something that they had been working on since like the 1950s, seriously working on since the 1950s. 1980, the president of the AFL-CIO, which is the largest union in the United States, will bring women into leadership positions. So really they're starting to make gains, and they're starting to get more opportunities within the unions, and that's great. Okay, another one, equal pay. Equal pay is still very problematic. Okay, it basically comes down to the government, the Labor Department, basically being responsible for enforcing equal pay, and the federal government does not always enforce it. It's basically the Labor Department responsible for routine checks of workplaces, and that really is not consistent. So what you have to have is you have to have the women basically bring lawsuits. If you bring lawsuits and basically argue the Equal Pay Act, then it can actually be an easy win. But it's the fact that mentally, it's a mental perception for women of like, I don't want to challenge it. I might lose my job. I don't want to ruffle the feathers at work. And so I'll just take what I get. You have to change that mentality of women saying, I should get equal rights or I should get equal pay, and I'm going to fight for it. And it's law under the Equal Pay Act of '63. And I'm going to fight it, and I'm going to stand up for my rights, and I'm going to stand up for myself. And so you have to have that mental shift for you to have more lawsuits. When you're getting in the 70s, you're going to start to have that mental shift. You still don't have a lot of lawsuits, but you're going to start to have more. And you start to see women really standing up for themselves and saying, I'm going to fight for the equal pay. And I might even fight for promotions. Like, I'm not getting promoted, but I am clearly capable of the guy that got promoted. And so in the 70s, you start to see that, okay? But it's the beginning of it. Okay. Education and professions. We've been talking about this through the decades. Between 1965 and 1985, education definitely has changed. And the number of females in colleges are definitely going to increase, definitely due to affirmative action. 1962, women made up of 6.2% of law students. 1984, women made up of 33% of law students. 1972, 22% of medical students were women. By 1985, and I don't have it, I just have 1972, 22% of medical students were women. 1970, 1% of PhD students were women. By 1985, 30% of PhD students were women. So women are definitely increasing in your professional studies. And I would also say more women are getting those degrees and then actually working for a longer period of time with that degree. Now, when you're talking like 70s and on. Okay, women in the media. Now that's something else that I had mentioned before when I talked about the 60s, and they needed to change that perception of women in the media. And there definitely was a little bit of a push, and they really wanted to kind of work on that. From the mid 60s and then on, more women have moved into the media. They've moved into the media, they've moved into advertising, they've moved into television, or meaning like acting. And they're trying to portray women differently and not the way that they had always been portrayed. When you talk about the media and when you talk about the news, you're going to start to see very highly respected and also highly paid and highly paid female journalists. When you're talking 1970s, the two women definitely at the top of their game would be Barbara Walters and Connie Chung. Now, Connie Chung was Chinese or Chinese descent. And so she definitely was breaking barriers just because of two things, because of being Chinese, but also because of being a woman. Barbara Walters, she's up there in age. I know she's still around with us. I don't think she does a whole lot in the media anymore. But Barbara Walters made a name for herself late 60s, definitely 70s, and then on, I would say on until kind of mid 2000s. And she was highly paid and very highly respected as a journalist. Now another woman, not 70s, or I would say late 70s, and then really kind of, I would say kind of comes into her own in the 80s, would be Oprah Winfrey. And this is also, once again, this is an African-American woman, and she's breaking boundaries for two different reasons: for being a woman, for being African-American and a woman. She starts out in the newsroom, I believe it's Chicago. And she does very well. And then, as we all know, she goes out on her own, and then she has the Oprah Winfrey Talk Show, which the success of the show is just absolutely phenomenal. It is on for many, many years. She has actually great influence through her talk show, and she just becomes this kind of beloved journalist, kind of beloved media person. And then she'll actually go on, and she's also very highly paid. And then she'll also be able to create her own studio. And then she'll also, if she has her own business, she has her own studio. She has her own TV channel, newspaper or magazine at this point in time. And she can definitely, she's very influential. So once again, these women that I've mentioned are deviant women. Excuse me, deviant women, and pushing the boundaries and doing them very well, and proving that they are, in a sense, are role models, but prove that women can be doing these jobs and be just very well respected within that genre. Now, television and film. Women are starting to take more lead roles, okay, within television and film. You tend to see them playing stronger characters. Just overall, and in television, when you see like a television series, they're not, the supporting actors. You'll actually start to see shows that are kind of, the storyline is actually based around women. When you get into TV shows, some examples like in the 80s would be Cagney and Lacey, The Cosby Show. The Cosby Show was family, but the mother, Phyllis Rashad, and I should remember her name. I can see it, and I can't think of it now. But anyway, she always played a very strong character. It wasn't just like she was the wife that didn't do a whole lot. She actually was a lawyer. Her character was a lawyer, but she played a very strong role. But my whole point is that these are the beginnings when you talk about television, that you have shows that are based around women. Now, today we look at television shows, and we have a lot of television shows that actually women are the lead role, or they're basically like co-lead. And so they have really broken that boundary, and they're kind of doing it on their own terms. Okay, when you talk about movies, back then, when you're talking like 70s and then into 80s, you have movies like Norma Ray. Norma Ray was Sally Field, and she played a woman who wanted to organize a union within the factory that she worked, and it was a very strong character. Another movie very popular was The Color Purple. The Color Purple really talked about or the movie was about really strong women, okay? And so there are umpteen movies since then, but these are kind of the beginning movies where you have women as star roles and are doing extreme, and they provide, or they play very strong characters. They do very well, and it's almost kind of like breaking that glass ceiling and breaking boundaries so you can go in a different direction for women in the media, whether in television, whether in movies. Okay, women's in sports. You have, as we know, now women sports programs, whether it's in high school or college. And definitely over the years, the programs are definitely going to expand. And then you'll also start to see women athletes that are going to definitely be professional athletes and really at the top of their game. You have the Women's Professional Basketball League, started in 1978. You will have a woman by the name of Billie Jean King. Billie Jean King was an absolutely fabulous tennis player. And in 1973, there is going to be a challenge between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs. And Bobby Riggs was a male tennis player who was at the top of his game. And so they were going to have this game to basically see who would win. And Billie Jean King won. I always said I was going to watch the movie, and I still haven't watched it. It's called The Battle of the Sexes, and that is a movie that talks about this, where those players are, and then this actual tennis match that occurs. But because of that, she's actually kind of labeled, or she's labeled as basically the world's greatest tennis player. And after she beats them, it kind of takes on a whole new concept to say she's actually better than men. So anyway, definitely making progress. Women in the arts, okay? 1966, New York Philharmonica is going to hire its first female performer. And one of the things that they had to do was they ended up doing a basically a double-blind audition. So basically, the performers would perform behind a curtain, so you couldn't tell if they were male or female, because what was happening is that you would have females that would basically perform, audition, and chances are they were probably just as good, maybe better, but they would never be accepted because they were a woman. So once they started doing these blind auditions, you'll actually start to see women start to get into these major orchestras. And New York Philharmonica will be or Harmonic will be 1966, where you have your first female. I don't have what performer she is. Okay, moving on. Writing, okay, or literature. You definitely have a huge amount of women that will make a name for themselves in literature. You will have Sylvia Plath. Okay, Sylvia Plath will write the bell jar. You have Alice Walker. She will write The Color Purple. So The Color Purple is out there for actually a couple of things. First, the novel, and then actually the movie. And then you have Maya Angelou. She became widely known for her civil rights activism, but then also for her writing. I knew her actually more for her writing, and then as a civil rights activist. One of her famous writings, because she's a prolific writer, one of her very well known was I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. So women are definitely making a name for themselves in literature. Now, women in politics. Women in politics, when you talk about starting out in 1965, you start to see a more visibility of women in politics. More women are trying to get into politics. Kind of starts mainly at a local level, then will eventually make their way into national level. 1969 to 1981, the number of female state legislatures increased from 301 to 908. Female state legislatures will increase between 1969 to 1981 from 301 to 908. 1975 to 1981, the number of elected female officials went from 5,765 to 14,225. So 1975 to 1981, the number of elected female officials went from 5,765 to 14,225. President Johnson, when he comes into office in 65, will appoint many women to his administration. African American women, more women are doing a lot of things. It's about registering to vote and then voting, but you also start to see more women getting involved in politics. A good example that I had already given you is going to be Democrat Shirley Chisholm, and as we know, she was the first American woman to the House of Representatives, 1968 to 1982 from Brooklyn, New York. 1981, President Reagan is going to appoint the first woman to the U.S. Supreme Court. That will be Sandra Day O'Connor. And since then, right, we've had more female appointments. Now we have two women. Sandra Day O'Connor basically retired. She resigned, she retired, and then we still have two on the Supreme Court. And then 1984, you have Democratic Geraldine Ferraro. Geraldine Ferraro will run as Walter Mondale's vice president for the 84 election. This is the first time that you really have women basically at the final point of voting. As an elected official, meaning at this point she would be vice president. But this is really the first time that a woman is going to make it that far. Yes, we've had women who have run for president, like Shirley Chisholm, and there's been a few other ones that have run for president in the past, but they never get very far. They basically announce their candidacy, and then it doesn't go anywhere. But now this is the first time that Ferraro is actually going to get, as a woman, so close to an election, to actually winning. And in a sense, she kind of breaks that glass ceiling, if you will, as far as politics. We know since then that in the 2008 election, you had John McCain and you had Sarah Palin. She was vice president with John McCain, and they did not win. And then this last time around, you had Hillary Clinton basically run against Donald Trump. And so once again, I mean, this, and also for Hillary Clinton, this is kind of the first time that a woman has made it that far into voting for the presidency, where she's basically up for, one or the other is going to make it to the presidency. And I know I shouldn't speak out of turn, but for at this point in time, for the 2020 election, Joe Biden is talking about bringing in a female vice president. I mean, it kind of sounds like it's a done deal. He's just got to decide who his runmate's going to be. And I don't know. I mean, I think he has actually a pretty good chance of actually winning the presidency. And the only reason why I say that is that it would put a woman into the vice presidency. And so women have definitely made huge strides. And also one other thing I should mention is that Speaker of the House is a woman. It's Nancy Pelosi, Democrat Nancy Pelosi, whether you're whatever political party you are. That's not the point. It's the point that a woman is Speaker of the House. And so the women have made huge gains when you talk about politics. Okay, women and family. The average family size has definitely decreased. The average family size in the 1980s is, I know it's going to sound crazy, it's 1.6 children. So I'm going to round that to 2. Your average family is about 2 children. Divorce rates have definitely increased. Divorce rates are actually about 50%. With divorces, what was I going to say? Oh, with divorces, most women will get custody of the children. That is actually starting to change, okay? In the beginning, when you're talking 70s and like 80s, that's definitely starting to change, or that was true. I would say 90s, starting to change. You started to see dads more often fighting for custody of the kids, or more percentage of time of custody of the kids. Or what a lot of times nowadays has come down to is basically like 50-50 custody of children. So that definitely has changed and in a sense worked in favor of dads. Okay, feminization of poverty. Unfortunately, this is very true. When you talk about American women, there's a large group of American women living in poverty. More women are being single parents. And with being single parents and coupled with low-paying jobs, it definitely puts them into this cycle of poverty. And unfortunately, this is especially true with the African American community. 1980, 47% of families, African American families, were headed by women, and they did not always have good paying jobs. And so it just puts them in the cycle of poverty. And I normally don't get on my soapbox, but this is why it's so important for women to be educated and, in a sense, get solid jobs so they can take care of themselves, take care of the kids, themselves and their kids, or in a sense just contribute to the family. But if God should, forbid that you end up being a single woman with kids, having a strong job with stronger pay is definitely going to help those people out in the long run. Okay, moving on to something else. 1985, definitely a turning point. You definitely are seeing a lot of changes, I would say, in the 1980s in regards to women. Second, and it's still, this is where that second wave of feminism is kind of starting to die off. You still have women who are still involved in it, but women are still in female organizations, but women are starting to just kind of put it to everyday life. They're starting to hold up life as fairness, and they're going to challenge society. And they don't necessarily mean that it's feminism. They're just like, hey, if I'm doing this, it should be fair. Whatever I'm doing and whatever a man's doing, it should just flat out be fair. And you kind of see a shift in culture. And I think culture or society, there's far more people that are saying it's just flat out fairness, that if you're doing the same thing, same type of education, everything should be fair. But then it's also about gender roles and behavior and how women are treated just overall. But you are starting to see in the 80s, because more women are becoming professionals, and women are also starting to challenge not just being professionals, but being promoted. Because that's like when that mental shift, it's like, well, I'm applying for the same job, but that guy got it, but I actually have more experience. And women are actually fighting it. And what you're seeing starting in 85 and then on definitely into the 90s is you're starting to see women having more power. It's not that they're not just doctors anymore, but they're now chiefs of staff. They're now heads of departments. It's about women being lawyers and not just being, in a sense, like a staff lawyer, but they actually have control of perhaps like a department within that law firm. Or perhaps they are a partner within the law firm. And once you become a partner within a law firm, you tend to have more power and more say. And so that's what's changing for women. And many women have challenged it so they can get into those positions. Once they get into those positions and open those positions, then it's easier for other women to get there. Okay? You have more women just flat out in the United States living in the United States. You have more women in college. This is 1985 and on. You have more women as primary consumers. You have women outliving men. Now, the reason why that I bring that up and why that's important is depending, obviously, on your finances. But if you're wealthy, okay, and your wife outlives the husband, then your wife is in control of the wealth, meaning a woman is in control with the wealth. And that's exactly what is happening statistically, that women outlive men. And so in some aspect, there will be a group of women that actually can yield a huge amount of money. And then also, when you talk about that, I mean, if you talk about it at a very high level, and you're talking like extreme wealth, but if you're talking about like, perhaps like the family, the family that started Walmart, one of the wealthiest women in the United States is basically a Walton relative, and she has inherited it over the years, and that's because she's outliving the men. But that's actually a very important aspect because she's extremely wealthy. Okay. Now, another thing that you will also see, and I don't have it with me like number wise, but when you look at CEOs, you have more females becoming CEOs of companies, and you have more women being CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. If you're a Fortune 500 company, you have to make a certain amount of money, meaning you're some of the top producing companies in the United States, and you actually have women who are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And for me, okay, that actually gives women a huge amount of power. And so for me, people will say, oh, a woman has to be a president, or a woman has to be in this high-ranking position. Yes, that would be fabulous, okay? But I also look at it in terms of like business, because if you have women who are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, they're making big decisions, and they're making big decisions that can affect the economy and can affect retail and economy at the end of the day. Not at this point in time. It was several years ago. You had Janet Yellen, Y-E-L-L-E-N. Janet Yellen was the first woman who was head of the Federal Reserve Board. And the Federal Reserve Board is the board that, it does a lot of things with money, but it's one of the biggest things they do is set interest rates. They decide the interest rates for the country. They also decide how much money is going to be in circulation. The Federal Reserve Board actually yields a great amount of economic power. And for a period of time, Janet Yellen, I think it's like a 6-year term. And what they do is that you can't get like reelected, okay? So you do your term, I think it's like 6 years, and then somebody else has to come take it because they want to kind of keep the leadership kind of always changing so you don't get like one person in power for a long period of time. But once again, you have a woman who's in a position of actually great economic power. And so for me, when I look at the country, I see these things as extremely positive because you have women in high profile positions that can yield a lot of power. Okay, overall, oh, and then one other one, and I always forget her name, and I apologize. Cheryl, she was the CEO, or not CEO, but she's now a part of Facebook, and she had the book Lean Forward, and she basically said, you know, women have to be more aggressive in business, and you've kind of got to make your way in business. I gotta go back and look at her name. I always forget. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, moving on. Changes, overall changes. 2006, and I know that's dated. The 109th Congress will have 67 women in the House of Representatives, 14 women in the Senate, 20 of the women in the House of Representatives were women of color. Sally Ride will be the first woman to reach outer space as an astronaut, and she basically kind of breaks that ceiling. After that, over 34 women have followed suit, and I did not read the article yesterday, but there was a woman astronaut, female astronaut from the United States that just made history. And I didn't read the article. And it's coming back to me. But my whole point is that Sally Ride's the first astronaut, and after that you have over 34 women, female astronauts. So religion. 1989, the Episcopal Church will ordain its first female bishop. 2001, Anne Dunwoody, D-U-N-W-O-O-D-Y, will be the first woman to achieve a 4-star general rank, and that's the United States Army. And then you have Lori Robinson. I have a picture of Lori Robinson on the slide. Lori Robinson will also be a 4-star general. She's in the United States Air Force. She will be a 4-star general from 2014 to 2018. She was the first female officer to command a Major Unified Combatant Command. Okay, and so she was commander of NORAD, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command. And the reason why this is so big is because, like Anne Dunwoody, she was a 4-star general, but she wasn't in command of combat troops. Lori Robinson, being a 4-star general, because Ann Dunwoody paved her way. Lori Robertson will be the first female four-star general will actually oversee combat troops. And so this, once again, is pushing the boundaries for women. So Ann Dunwoody, Lori Robinson would be, in a sense, kind of deviant women that are pushing that boundary and pushing the envelopes of women in the military. Also in the military, it's just definitely something I should mention. I always end up with Lori Robinson because it's real strong. But one other thing I want to mention within the military, we have far more women in the military, but women are actually going into combat. It's not that they're drafted. We still don't have a female draft. But in a sense, they're choosing to be in roles that will find themselves in combat. There's female fighter pilots, especially when you're out in the Middle East. You being just in a unit can could bring you into combat, and you don't really even realize it's going to happen. But the fact is that we have far more women in the military, and they're actually in combat. And this is a far position from where we were when we first started out in the class, where women were supposed to stay at home in the household and raise the kids and cook and really not say anything. And now we have women who are four-star generals making decisions that affect the lives of thousands of military personnel. We have women who run for president. We have women who are CEOs and can actually wield a huge amount of economic power. So it's taken an extremely long period of time, but in our class and in a very short period of time, we've actually seen a huge growth of women. All right, unfortunately, that is the end of my lectures and the lectures for this class. I hope that you have enjoyed the lectures, and I hope that you have learned a little bit about women in American history.